Christmas Day, 1989. 3 paratroopers dragged the last hardline communist dictator in Europe and his wife out a back door, across about 10 meters of gravel, and forced them against a kitchen wall. Their hands are tied behind their backs. The shooting starts before anyone gives the order. 3 Kalashnikovs on full automatic at close range. 120 bullets in roughly 4 seconds. The man against the wall had ruled the country for 24 years. The woman beside him had been deputy prime minister. Their trial, the one that ended 10 minutes before this, had lasted 50 minutes. 98 hours earlier, the same man had walked out onto a balcony in central Bucharest to give a speech he had given in different versions for 2 decades. It took 8 minutes for everything to change. I am Tom, your host from Forgotten Europe. And this is the story of the 5 days at the end of 1989, in which one of the longest-serving dictators in the Eastern Bloc lost a country, ran for his life, was caught on a country road, tried in a 50-minute trial, and shot against a kitchen wall on Christmas Day. This is not a story about how communism ended in Europe. There are longer, broader stories for that. This is a story about how one regime, in one country, collapsed faster than anyone alive at the time thought possible, and what those 5 days looked like from the inside. There is one question about those 5 days that Romanian historians still argue about. It is not what happened. The chronology is well documented. It is who was directing it. Whether what we call the Romanian Revolution was a popular uprising, or a coup at the top of the regime, dressed up to look like one. Watch the chronology carefully. The answer, if there is one, lives in the gaps. Let me start where it actually started, not Bucharest, a city in the west of Romania, near the Hungarian border, called Timișoara. On the 16th of December, 1989, a small crowd had been standing for 2 days in front of a house on Timișoara Cipariu Street. The house belonged to a Hungarian reformed pastor named Laszlo Tokes. The Romanian state had ordered him evicted. Tokes had been preaching sermons critical of the regime, quietly, in a small congregation, in a minority language. A parishioner who had publicly supported him, a man named Erno Uvarosi, had disappeared 3 months earlier. His body had been found in a forest near Timișoara, 2 days after that. Tokes knew what eviction meant. About 30 parishioners had come to stand outside his house to protect him. Then a few hundred, then a few thousand. On the night of the 15th, the mayor of Timișoara came personally to negotiate. He failed. On the 16th of December, Nicolae Ceaușescu, 9 days from his own execution, ordered the militia and the Securitate to clear the street and take Tokes away. The Securitate was the Romanian secret police, one of the densest surveillance services in the Eastern Bloc. The British historian Denis Dilettant, who has written the standard work on it, estimates 11,000 full-time officers and roughly 500,000 informers at the regime's peak, in a country of 23 million people. By the afternoon of the 16th, the crowd in front of the church had stopped chanting for Tokes. They were chanting against Ceaușescu. They blocked the trams on what was then March 6th Boulevard. They tore his portrait off a wall. By evening, the central square of Timișoara was on fire. The next morning, the 17th of December, Ceaușescu gave the order to shoot. By the end of that day, roughly 60 people were dead in the streets of Timișoara. More than 2,000 were wounded. Tanks rolled through the city center. The borders with Hungary, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, and the Soviet Union were sealed. And the next morning, the 18th of December, Ceaușescu got on a plane to Iran. The Iran trip is the part of this story that I find hardest to explain to people the first time they hear it. A state visit had been scheduled with Tehran. 60 civilians had just been shot dead in one of his cities. Western radio stations were beginning to broadcast the news inside Romania. And he flew to Iran anyway, on schedule, for 2 days of formal ceremonies. A declassified CIA briefing from the 19th of December, written while Ceaușescu was still in Tehran, describes the trip as calculated to project confidence and strength. The Americans believed he wanted the world to see that the protests had not shaken him. Inside Romania, the protests were not over. They were spreading. He came back on the 20th of December and gave a television address that evening. He said the dead in Timișoara were a small number of fascists and hooligans, manipulated by foreign intelligence services. He said the response had been justified. He said order would be restored. And then he made the decision that ended his rule. He ordered for the following day at noon, a mass rally in central Bucharest. 100,000 people bussed in from the factories, 23 August, Republica, Pipera, Military, exactly as they had been bussed in every year for 24 years. The plan was that he would speak from the balcony of the Central Committee building, condemn Timișoara as a fascist plot, and the bussed-in crowd would chant his name back at him on live television. The country would see that Bucharest was loyal. The protests would die. It was a speech he had given 100 times before. It always worked. The square. On the morning of the 21st of December, the workers were summoned at their factories and put on buses. They were given flags, they were given placards. They were told where to stand and when to clap. At 12 o'clock, Ceaușescu and his wife, Elena, walked out onto the balcony of the Central Committee building in what was then Piața Palatului, Palace Square. Today, it is called Piața Revoluției, Revolution Square. Below them, 100,000 people. The cameras of the state television were running live. For the first 8 minutes, everything worked. He thanked the organizers. He announced an insignificant raise to the minimum wage and a small bump in child support. The crowd applauded on cue. And then, from somewhere in the back of the square, something happened that had not happened in 24 years. A noise. Romanian state television was broadcasting live. The footage of what happens next still exists. Ceaușescu is at the microphone. His hand is raised. He is mid-sentence about workers' achievements, about Romanian agriculture, the standard material. Then a low rumble starts from somewhere behind the bussed-in front rows. It is not a cheer, it is a jeer. Then it becomes a word. People in the crowd are chanting Timișoara. Then they are whistling. Then they are booing. Of all the documented seconds of the Cold War, the next 4 are the ones I cannot let go of, because Ceaușescu does not understand what he is hearing. His face does the thing a face does when the world has stopped behaving the way it always behaved. He raises his hand higher. He says into a hot microphone, "Hello, hello." Elena leans toward him and says quietly, "Stay calm, stay calm." Then she leans toward the microphone herself and shouts at the crowd to be quiet. The state television director, in a panic, cuts to a static black screen. When the broadcast comes back, a few seconds later, Ceaușescu is trying to keep speaking. The boos are louder now. Security men are visible behind him on the balcony. He says some words about the wage increases, again, as if repeating them will fix what is happening. They will not. By 2 in the afternoon, the rally has dissolved into a riot. By evening, demonstrators are in the central streets of Bucharest. That night, the 21st of December, the Securitate opens fire on the crowds. By morning, 162 people are dead in Bucharest alone. But by then, the man on the balcony has already lost the country. The helicopter. The morning of the 22nd of December, tens of thousands of workers march on the Central Committee building from the suburbs. Military, Pipera. the 23 August factory, Republica. They are not bussed in this time. They are carrying flags from which the socialist coat of arms has been cut out. A square hole in the middle of the red, yellow, and blue. At 12:06 in the afternoon, a white French-built Eurocopter, EZ-365 Dauphin, lifts off from the roof of the Central Committee building. On board are Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu, 2 senior party officials, 2 bodyguards, and the personal pilot of the dictator. His name is Vasile Malutsan. He is 47 years old. He has a gun pointed at his head for most of what is about to happen. The first stop is the Ceaușescu Villa at Snagov, about 40 kilometers north of Bucharest. While Nicolae is on the phone trying to find somewhere in the country that will still take him, Elena packs 4 more bags: jewelry, bathrobes, towels. They are loaded into the already overloaded helicopter. Then they take off again, headed for Târgoviște, a town about 80 kilometers northwest, where Nicolae has been told the local party officials are still loyal. About 30 minutes into that flight, Malutsan tells the Ceaușescus that the helicopter has been picked up on radar. He tells them they are likely to be shot down at any moment. He recommends they land immediately on the road below. This is a lie. Malutsan made it up. Whether he made it up alone, a frightened pilot improvising with a gun at his head, or whether someone in Bucharest had passed him an instruction before takeoff, is one of those gaps the historians keep pointing at. He lands the helicopter on the Bucharest-Târgoviște highway, near a town called Giesti. The bodyguards get out and stop the first car that comes along. The driver is a doctor named Nicolae Deca. They put the Ceaușescus in the back seat, at gunpoint. Deca drives them about 10 kilometers to a village called Bucharest. Then he stops and tells them this is as far as he goes. What happens in the next 2 hours is, depending on which account you read, either a chaotic flight through villages or a slow drift toward an arrest that was already arranged. The Ceaușescus get into a second car. They get out near Târgoviște. 2 traffic policemen recognize them at a checkpoint. The army arrives. They are taken to the local military garrison. The commander of that garrison is a colonel named Andrei Kemenici. Years later, in 2014, Kemenici told American radio that when the Ceaușescus arrived, he was ready to protect them with his life. He kept them in a small room with 2 iron beds and dirty mattresses for the next 3 nights. The trial. Slow down with me here, because what happens in the next 50 minutes is not really a trial. At 5:30 on the morning of the 25th of December, the Ceaușescus are brought by armored personnel carrier from their cell to the garrison's command office. A sergeant deliberately revs the engine to mask the sound of them getting out. They are given a brief medical examination. They are walked into a small room with a folding table at one end. Behind the table sit 2 military judges, Gica Popa and Ioan Nistor, and a military prosecutor named Dan Voinea. The defense lawyers are Nicolae Teodorescu and Constantin Lucescu. Both lawyers behave, by the assessment of nearly everyone in the room, as a second team of prosecutors. A general named Victor Stănculescu, Ceaușescu's deputy defense minister 4 days earlier, the new government's acting defense minister now, has flown in from Bucharest with the firing squad and the camera crew. Before the trial begins, Stănculescu has already chosen the wall. The charges are read aloud: genocide, 60,000 victims, subversion of state power, destruction of public property, undermining the national economy, attempting to flee the country with over $1 billion United States dollars deposited in foreign bank accounts. Ceaușescu refuses to recognize the tribunal. He says repeatedly that he will only answer to the Great National Assembly. He calls the trial a sham. He calls the revolution a coup, organized by foreign intelligence agencies. and, at one point, a Soviet plot. He turns his head away when questions are addressed to him. Elena Ceaușescu answers some of the questions. Most of her answers are to deny that she ever held a position of real power, despite having been deputy prime minister and the most senior woman in the Romanian state for a decade. At one point, she leans toward Nicolae and says, in Romanian, do not answer them. The whole trial takes about 50 minutes. 20 years later, Dan Voinea, the military prosecutor, told the Irish Times something that has stayed with me since I first read the transcripts of this case. He said he flew to Târgoviște that morning, expecting to deliver an indictment, after which the Ceaușescus would be transferred to Bucharest for a proper trial. He said the political stakes outweighed the desire for normality and justice. He said the communists sacrificed the Ceaușescus to save themselves. That sentence is the center of the question Romanian historians have not been able to close. If Voinea is right, if the trial was a piece of theater to protect the apparatus by removing its two most visible heads, then what looks like a revolution from a distance begins to look, up close, like something else. Like a defensive shedding of two people, so that the much larger system around them could be inherited rather than dismantled. I do not know if Voinea is right. I know that Stănculescu, who picked the wall, had been deputy defense minister 4 days earlier. I know the executioner regiment had been chosen, and the wall had been chosen before the verdict was read. Those are not the facts of a justice system finding its footing in a new country. They are the facts of a chain of command, operating cleanly. The court hands down 2 death sentences. They are scheduled to be carried out immediately. The Ceaușescu's last 2 requests, conveyed through their lawyer Teodorescu, are these: to die together and to have their hands left untied. The first is granted, the second is not. 4 paratroopers tie their hands behind their backs. Elena protests. Teodorescu writes later that when he offered to argue an appeal for her, she rejected him because she felt insulted by the suggestion that she might need one. The paratroopers walk them out a back door, into a courtyard at the rear of the building, toward a wall. The wall. The wall is not impressive. It is the back wall of a barracks kitchen. The plaster is grayish yellow. There are some old bullet holes from earlier 1980s target practice, which has caused, ever since, a small forensic argument about which bullet holes are which. The execution squad is 8 paratroopers from the 64th Paratrooper Regiment, based at Botani. The named shooters are Captain Ionel Boiru, Sergeant Major Georgian Octavian, and Sergeant Doran Curlin. Hundreds of paratroopers had volunteered when the request went out that morning. The 8 were chosen on the helicopter from Bucharest. 3 of them later said, in different interviews, that the worst part was not the shooting. It was the walk. Curlin, in 2009, told an American reporter that he stood 3 feet behind Ceaușescu as they walked toward the wall. He said Ceaușescu realized, in those last steps, that there was no way out. Curlin said, and this is in Grigore Cartianu's book on the case, that he saw a single tear come down Ceaușescu's face. Then more, and then the dictator began to shout, "Death to the traitors! Death to the traitors!" And then, as the paratroopers pushed him to face the wall, he began to sing. The song he sang, in his final seconds, was the International, the anthem of international communism. The same song he had stood and saluted at every party congress for 30 years. Elena, beside him, did not sing. The accounts of her last words vary, but in nearly all of them, she insulted the soldiers. The most commonly cited version is, in translation, "You mutt." The firing squad did not wait for an order. The paratroopers had been told, in the briefing on the helicopter, to fire on command. But in the moment, as soon as Nicolae and Elena were against the wall, they fired. A post-mortem later counted 120 bullets between the 2 bodies. The military camera crew, who had been sent to film the execution, did not film it. The shooting was over before they got the camera into position, so the director called for an extra soldier to step out and fire a single burst from his Kalashnikov. For the camera, at the wall, the Ceaușescus were already lying in front of. That is the gunfire the world saw on the news that evening. The aftermath, the smoke, the bodies in the dust. A volley for the record, fired by a man who was not part of the firing squad, into a wall that no longer had anyone standing against it. What remains? The death toll of the Romanian Revolution, including Timișoara and Bucharest, and the smaller actions in other cities, was 1,142 killed, 3,138 wounded, 748 orphaned children officially registered. The military barracks at Târgoviște is now a museum. The room where the Ceaușescus slept on iron beds for 3 nights is preserved. The trial room is preserved. The wall is preserved. In 2013, the museum painted 2 white outlines on the pavement where the bodies fell. The helicopter that lifted them off the roof of the Central Committee building was eventually stored in a Romanian Air Force depot, where it remains. The pilot, Vasile Maluțan, the man who lied about the radar and saved the lives of everyone in the country, who wanted the Ceaușescus gone, died in another helicopter crash on the 26th of May, 1995, 6 years after that flight. He had just testified before a parliamentary commission about what really happened in those 4 hours on the 22nd of December. His helicopter's tail caught a high-tension power line. He died on the way to the hospital. He was 53 years old. Some people in Romania think his death was an accident. Some do not. Of those 1,142 dead, almost all were civilians. They died in streets, in squares, in front of factories. Not one of them died in the trial room at Târgoviște, where the only military and political figures of the Ceaușescu regime to face anything resembling justice were the 2 who, by then, were already irrelevant. The other generals, the other ministers, the Securitate officers. The system that had run for 24 years did not collapse with the man on the wall. Most of it transitioned. Stănculescu, who picked that wall, was already acting defense minister of the new government on the day he picked it. He held that title officially 7 weeks later, in February. He would not be convicted of anything related to 1989 until 2008, 19 years later. Whether you call those 5 days a revolution or a coup depends on what you measure. The dead in the streets, or who was sitting at the table the morning after. Both stories are partly true. The first is louder, because the second is harder to celebrate. I want you to picture, one last time, 2 scenes from those 5 days. The first is 12 o'clock in the afternoon, on the 21st of December. The balcony, the microphone, the hand raised, the hello, hello. The 4 seconds in which a man's face did not yet understand what was happening below him. The second is 2:50 in the afternoon, on the 25th of December. The courtyard, the wall, the hands tied behind his back. The 4 seconds in which 120 bullets went into him and the woman beside him. Between the 2 scenes are 98 hours. What stays with me, after all the documents and all the testimonies, is the speed of those 5 days. Not the cruelty before them, and not the violence after. The speed. How quickly something that had seemed permanent, an entire system, an entire grammar of fear, turned out to be 5 days of momentum away from collapse. There is a footnote that historians sometimes use about the year 1989. In Poland, it took 10 years. In Hungary, 10 months. In East Germany, 10 weeks. In Czechoslovakia, 10 days. In Romania, 10 hours. If you ever go to Bucharest, the balcony is still there. The building is now the Ministry of Internal Affairs. The square is now called Revolution Square. There is a monument in the middle of it. It is not, by most assessments, a very good monument. People in Bucharest call it, in private, the potato on a stick. But the balcony is the same balcony. The kitchen wall in Târgoviște is the same wall. You can stand at either one. 80 kilometers of country road and 98 hours of history between them. If this story stayed with you, you will find more like it on this channel. Forgotten Europe, places where the visible record is the small surface of something much harder underneath. Subscribe if you want the next one when it goes live. I am Tom. Thank you for watching.